Good morning and welcome to today's webinar, The Turnover Secret, helping managers foster relationships that encourage new hires to stick around. So thanks for joining us and thanks for those who've been waiting on the line patiently. My name is Tegan. I head up our customer success team here at Enboarder, and I'm very lucky to be joined today by Tim Way from the Career Conversation. Welcome, Tim.
Thank you, Tegan. Good morning and great to be here.
Wonderful. Well, it'd be great to hear a little bit about your role, Tim, and a bit more about how the Career Conversation is helping managers provide effective feedback.
Yeah. Okay. I'm speaking to you. Firstly, I should say I'm speaking to from Singapore, which is home for me. I've lived here for about 10 years. Prior to that, was in Australia, and then before that in the UK. My background's all been in TA and HR roles. And most recently, I was an HR director at Hewlett-Packard here in Asia. And last year, I set up the Career Conversation with a number of other individuals. Our goal in doing that, we want, we recognise the need for support and help. The world of work and careers specifically has got a lot of disruption associated with it. And we felt there's an opportunity to help people navigate their way through that journey, and in particular help HR heads and others whose role it is to try and sort of help people within their organisation. And we do that predominantly by producing a range of digital short form career-related material. So that's sort of things you can read, things you can listen to in podcasts and watch in videos. And then we just get very creative about how we connect that material to the audience. And partnering with yourselves and the Enboarder platform is one fantastic way that we use that platform to go and reach and connect with people at a time that really makes it matter.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tim. Well, it's great to have you join us today, and we're looking forward to hearing your insights. So what we'll be covering today is we're really going to be having a conversation about the critical pieces of the puzzle when it comes to employee retention and engagement. So we'll be covering some of the warning signs, common pitfalls, we'll include some scalable strategies, and then how companies can use data and technology to piece that all together. We will leave some time for Q&A at the end. If you haven't used Zoom before, there is a Q&A panel at the bottom of your screen. So feel free to pop in your questions throughout the presentation, but we will get to them at the very end. So today's organisations are really putting a lot of emphasis on finding and sourcing the right talent, and the challenge really shifts once someone has joined an organisation to how can we actually retain them. So when I think about prospective customers and our customers that are now on board, some of the issues that we're solving for with onboarding is around high turnover, disengaged employees, managers that aren't potentially investing in the process. The lack of consistency is a huge one, so really being able to deliver a consistent onboarding experience from one hire to the next. And the onboarding is really quite task-focused. It's really about just pushing out all of the onboarding material at the very beginning, and it's really a content overload for managers. And I think the last piece is really around that lack of visibility that managers have into the process as well. So this is a really nice visual representation of the employee, journey. And, if we start off and thinking about the engagement levels throughout the life cycle, they're really high at the time of offer. So we think about the amount of resources and time and energy that goes into that talent attraction and recruitment process. And employees receive their offers and they're on a real high. And then we see typically that engagement drops. They don't hear anything from the organisation and potentially don't hear from their manager. And then we see that continued in their first days, weeks, months, as the engagement levels just really start to drop off, as the organisation isn't ready and they don't have a refined process in place. And when we do see, onboarding and engagement really invested in. New hires are really now excited about the prospect of joining the organisation. And one of the key things is really thinking about reconfirming to that new hire that they've made a really great decision. The feeling is then really cemented from day one about, why they made this decision, this leap of faith to join the organisation. And the organisation is really putting the necessary processes in place to make sure that it's a great experience. And so when I talked with Tim earlier in the last sort of few weeks, I think we continually sort of kept coming back to that whilst we can put a lot of these great processes in place, we need to really marry that with the soft skills that are required of managers. So just sort of thinking on that, Tim, what are your thoughts on, I guess, how managers and, I guess, employers are sort of not being able to sort of, meet the engagement levels that are required?
Yeah, I think you made a good and very relevant point earlier. It's and that sort of starts with thinking that how we're working is changing. Our whether it's design thinking, agile approaches, flatter structures, workforces are made up of different types of workers. They may not be in offices; they're more distributed in some cases. So how we're working is changing, and that needs to be met with how we're engage the workforce. And there's a lot of focus on how we engage the workforce. And there's much more focus on experience associated with that. And I think there's no more important point in that sort of journey of engagement than the early one, that sort of onboarding and induction of an individual. So I think if you look at that as a consideration, if you look at the word experience, how do we take someone through an experience, not in a overly exhaustive way or too many touch points in conversations, but an experience that means they are feeling and are ready to be productive emotionally, productive tactically, productive in with the tools that they need as quickly as possible. I think that's what we're all striving for. But I think certainly experience has got more emphasis now. And I think you touched on another important point about that accountability. It's always been a consideration. In perhaps in many cases, the business would like HR to manage it all, and it all just happens. And I think HR areas absolutely would acknowledge they have a very important role in this piece of engagement. But perhaps the bigger influence sits with the business and some of those leaders. And therefore, how can technology can be a great enabler? How can we use technology and messages, awareness, some of the softer aspects that are going to make a difference too. I think there's an opportunity to do that.
Agreed. And if we think about, we break down the process, I guess, and some of the common pitfalls that we're seeing, you touched on the ownership piece. And I think ownership is becoming a common discussion that I especially have with my customers around where does the ownership of onboarding sit. And there's definitely been a shift and more emphasis on shifting the responsibility to managers. However, we know that, completely relying on managers to facilitate everything that's required to onboard and get someone to be as productive as quickly as possible is quite a large task. So really, how can we support the managers within the business with other stakeholders? And whether that be with a buddy, it be a mentor, induction supports. If you joined us actually for our last month's webinar, we spoke with Linda from Canva's happiness team, and they've rolled out a recent mentor program. And that's not only allowing for, a leadership track for potential high performers, but also really making sure that at a different level, the employees are getting that support, and it's not just coming from the manager. If I think about Centre Group, who run a really great onboarding and induction program, but they're using the role of an induction champ within their business, and that's allowing them to again, split some of the ownership and accountability on other stakeholders, and they're able to take on some of more the coordination and administration tasks of onboarding. And I think buddies is something that a lot of our customers do as well, and we definitely see some great connections being formed with the buddies, and being able to facilitate that through Enboarder as well, even prior to day one, making those introductions has been really, really powerful. On the communication piece, Tim, so I know this is conversations is, pardon the pun, is something that the career conversation definitely invests a lot of time in. What are your thoughts around the importance of having impactful conversations?
Well, I think a couple of, just pulling on a couple of points that you make there. I mean, the first one I'd say when you talk about warning signs as well is, yes, I think, most people have some data points, whether it relates to attrition or engagement surveys or mobility levels. I think for a lot of HR people, there's a lot of anecdotal as well. It's actually, what are you cleaning up? What are you spending your time having to do that you wishing you weren't, or doing at the last minute, or stepping in to do? I think, when we talk about speaking to people as well as, someone signed up to join your organization, and what you want to be able to at some point is have that dialogue with them that says, okay, you're 6 weeks in, you signed up for a job, you did some interviews, we told you what it would be like. Now, how are we measuring up? How are you feeling in all aspects of that? And how can those conversations be enabled and in a team way, not just from an HR person, but also for someone in the business? You mentioned there that it's important, I think as well, that it can't all be the burden of the hiring manager or the manager. He or she is typically incredibly busy, and their ability to put 150% of their time on onboarding in context of other talent discussions, mid-year reviews, performance, customers, growth, SLAs, etc., whatever else they're meant to be doing is really compromised. So I think you made a good point earlier. This really needs to be looked at as well as a team sport. But how can technology can really help bring that team together and let one member of the team know a data point or how the person's feeling, and trigger a discussion that can be had by an individual or between you. So I think it can really help sort of distribute the effort and the workload, remove accountability from one person, but also keep people on track and make sure that those really important conversations don't fall between the cracks.
Absolutely. And so thinking about then some of the strategies that organisations can put in place. And I think, whilst we have a great example of, Enboarder being able to sort of facilitate the important dialogue, it'd be great to sort of hear how the career conversation is sort of facilitating that today.
Yeah, I think the best way to bring that to life is where, rather than just a nudge and a message, you're educating as well. You're trying to help. I think, sending people to intranet sites, sort of self-prescribed, where you've got to go and find something is hard. Today it's about a real competition for eyeballs and attention. How can you put something in front of somebody when they need it most? I don't think we'll ever completely solve that, but I think certainly with the sort of Enboarder technology and some of our content, we're trying to get closer to doing that. So that, to bring that to life as an example, rather than a manager being told, beforehand, at this point, you need to have this conversation. Actually, it will send a reminder to the individual. Not only with a reminder, it will say, hey, it's time to have the conversation with X. But as well as that, it might say, here's a short video to look at, or here's 3 important questions you need to be asking. It's trying to sort of give them the nudge, make them aware of why it's important, and give them a little bit of the script. And even better, in using the tools, sometimes we're able to sort of take how the individual's feeling, that person to say, hey, quick survey I've done, a pulse survey, here's what's working, here's not what's not, or here where I could do with a bit more help. And then that also goes to that team, be it the manager or someone else, to be able to take an action. So I think it's about sort of intervention at the right times. certainly I think it's not about making this too exhaustive. We don't have any more time. I think if anything, we're trying to reduce the time, the piece of the pie, if you like, how much time is spent on this. We're trying to reduce that. But when we do have an intervention, when we do have a connection point, we're trying to make it as valuable as possible.
Absolutely. And I think real-time feedback is just huge. I think we've seen some great success stories where, new hires were able to provide some feedback, whether it be in person or through a sort of a pulse check-in through Enboarder, and the managers received that response straight away, and in real time they're able to have that conversation and be able to turn that conversation around. But I think, to your point, it's really important that we're providing the managers the tools and the resources to have an effective conversation. And it's not just about checking the box and ticking that box off. It's really about making sure that they're, like you sort of said, it's linking back to how they're really feeling and how we can actually make an impact for them.
Yes, and I think, if we think about our own experience, joining a new company is a pretty emotional experience. I think it's full stop. I think there's a huge amount of sort of discovery as well, and feelings of imposter syndrome, and geez, am I going to be able to do what I've signed up for, and a whole range of things in there, and meeting new individuals, and I think we when someone is reflecting on that and feeling that they've made a right decision, then hey, their discretionary effort, their comfort in releasing and sharing a lot of the competencies that you've hired them for is just greater, becomes a bit more faster, and leads towards that sort of productivity being quicker and higher. But I think it's recognizing that it's an emotional experience as well as a sort of tactical and one.
And something we talked about as well, Tim, was, and you made a really good point about how everyone has a different start line. It'd be great to hear more about the philosophy there.
Yeah, some of this was a sort of practical experience I think I shared to you. And, I was at a company ourselves where we were looking at this process, and we talked about how it could be, a real point of some competitive sort of point of difference, and we could do it really, really well. And I think someone in the room made a good point, which was, hang on, before we run, let's walk. Actually, we're struggling with some of these perhaps basic elements of it. So I think that the point there was, it doesn't have to be, as I said, it's not about time, not about making it too exhaustive, not about what it could be on a whiteboard. You have to look at it in the context of your organization's people, readiness, your other workload and effort. But I think that the joy of some of the tools that you have now is you can structure them quite carefully, and you can start, you know your own start line, what looks good would look like to begin with, and you can begin a journey to do that. You don't have to make it, you don't have to win awards for your onboarding program on day one. It's a great goal and aspiration to have, but you can start with getting some of the key things right, and then build on that. So I think, that's what speaks to the start line everyone has.
Definitely. And I think something that I'm seeing some great use cases for Enboarder as well is how we can start to have specific learning tracks for managers and really sort of coaching them on that experience. So, everyone has a different level of, experience with, being a people leader, and it doesn't sort of just come naturally to some people. We see people being promoted because they're a great performer and might be great at their core job, but people leadership is actually another whole gamut. So I've seen customers using their workflows to be able to actually administer coaching to the managers on how they can actually have those appropriate conversations, give them the confidence on what those conversations could look like, and ways to really tackle those conversations as well. And I think as well, in terms of scaling your strategies, thinking about sort of delivering just the key messages at the right time. I think we constantly sort of see these managed toolkits, or they'll receive a whole PDF document as soon as someone has been confirmed to start in their organisation, and it will have all the tools and resources they need to do to get someone up and ready for day one. But it's really about how can we actually split up those key tasks and those key initiatives that they need to complete, and actually just be informing them at the right time, as opposed to just bombarding them with a million things at once. And I think the other thing as well is sort of sharing the success as well. We know that within organisations we have managers that are potentially more leading the way than others, and being able to highlight their efforts as well. So where there has been a great success story, or a improvement or a development of a manager that's had a really great outcome, I think being able to celebrate those successes internally really helps to, educate the rest of the business as well. So then, thinking about data and technology, we've sort of talked about this throughout, some of the pitfalls and some of the warning signs and how you can implement some of these strategies. But Tim, thinking about your use of technology or what you're seeing with customers, what are your thoughts around the importance of data and technology?
Yeah, I think we're all, obviously, we're very focused, people are, committed to sort of enablement technology and how it can help and manage what they need to do. And I think in an enterprise environment, that's got two considerations. Certainly one, an important one, there's lots of opportunity. There's some great tools that are there. But it's also, they've got to fit into your architecture, your environment and your framework and where else you're making investments and other platforms that you have. So the sort of the scope of what's possible is getting bigger. But the art of what you can actually do in your organization might be a little bit more restricted. So I think there's always that consideration. I think Enboarder's platform is we found it fantastic because there's a lot of security considerations, API enablement and a whole host of things that make it sort of easy to sort of plug in. So I think on balance, this is a balance of technology and touch. How do you use technology from an enablement point of view and then allow it to sort of touch at the right points and convey and carry the right messages and the material for you? I think the other point that is hard is there's a real burden on how you maintain this. If you think of the body of assets that are required for somebody onboarding, the different, you mentioned there, toolkits that we used to have, the forms, the documents, etc. There's a huge range of collateral there, and it's a hell of a process, sort of A, creating, and B, managing and maintaining the relevance of that. Whilst this doesn't disappear ever, I think by using both a tool and a tool that's got a lot of forms and experience and built within it, and perhaps in partnership with someone like ourselves where there's access to other assets that you can pick and choose, you can really reduce the amount of time you have to think about maintaining that collateral. And you can be thinking more about the impact that you want it to have rather than the burden of who's producing, where's the library, how are we keeping it, when was it last updated, etc. And that shouldn't be overlooked. There's a huge burden in doing that.
No, that's very true. And I think also about thinking about different sort of communication channels, whether that be something like a Slack or WhatsApp. People communicate obviously in different ways. And then the content itself as well. I think more and more we know that being able to digest small amounts of content at a time is a lot more engaging, and we're actually going to deliver fewer things but more important things at a time. One of the features that I think really helps scale the effort of managers is to be able to have reminders at key points. So you might sort of say on day 2, make sure you're scheduling your one-on-one and having them load that time with their new hire, and it's not something that just sort of gets away and 2 weeks later they've realised they haven't had that catch up. Same thing with, schedule that first performance review. Do that in week 1. Putting all of these times in the diary will help the managers to not chase their tail after these action items should have happened, and actually just sort of really making sure that this is being, scheduled and the time is going to be held, and then they're accountable as well. So I know that we're coming to time, but it'd be great to see if we've got any questions, and we're more than happy to field any questions that you might have. Tim, this might be a good one for you. How do you deal with different cultural differences when it comes to, onboarding and coaching managers?
Yes, I mean it's a really good question, and I'd sort of throw into that not just cultural, generational as well. I think that's a consideration. How do you how people want to be engaged with the type, if you like, the method of engagement for them is different. So I think there's two parts. I think it is a consideration. Certainly, it can be one that you really need to think about if you're operating across countries. If you're engaging with individuals in Japan or vis-a-vis Australia, there would clearly be some differences potentially in some of the messages that you may be taking, and when you're having conversations and the nature of those conversations. There may be other aspects as well that will be important in relation to the process. So I think they would be absolutely a design consideration. I think underlying that, though, it's underpinned by an aspect of connecting. The output that you want is the same. You want that individual to be immersed, welcome, safe, have the assets that they need, aware, and you want them to be as productive as quickly as you can. So the goal doesn't change, but I think if you're working across borders, there are a few considerations that are there, but still focusing on the principle of connection and content at the time that it matters.
Yeah, absolutely. We also have a question about what are some practices to avoid. We've covered a lot of the good to-dos. So practices to avoid. I think when I think about manager engagement, it's definitely about not inundating the managers with everything at the wrong time, I would say. So, once when they're bringing someone new into the team, there's obviously a number of things that need to happen. But I think it's really important to think about what are the key things that need to occur and when. I think the timing is really, really key. And I think a lot of technology doesn't really always enable that, but making sure you've got processes in place that you can really enable and empower managers at the right time as opposed to just it's the business. And I think real-time feedback is huge as well. If you're not reviewing and analysing what your employees are actually saying and how they're feeling, then again it's just becoming a tick-the-box exercise, and you're not actually being able to take on the feedback and actually action it. We've also got a question about pre-employment packs. Tim, you sort of referred to them as well. What are your thoughts around employment packs or pre-employment packs?
Is there anything else there in the context of that? Is it as in the value of them? I'm assuming someone's asking about the value of a pre-employment pack. Just about them in general. I guess one thing I would sort of say is that I think it's good to have the employment packs. Like, I think it's fine to have a toolkit or resource available so that managers and employees can reference something at any time. However, I think we know that with engagement, how many managers and employees are going to actively locate those packs and reference them at the right time. And that's where coupling technology to sort of deliver those nudges and facilitate some of those sort of key tasks or initiatives that they should be doing through other sort of means. So I think they're definitely valid, portals and packs, but you need to sort of couple it with the engagement. That would be my piece of advice. Yes, I'd agree with that. I think there's a part of you that says, hey, they're great. If someone's got a pack, then great. Someone's done some work at some point and thought about it and realized that the connection is really, really important, etc. Now, given the things that we've talked about, can the pack be replaced with something and evolve into something that's a bit more digital, lighter in relation to production, time, cost, effort, easier to distribute, and rather than just to one person, can go to multiple people. So I think it's sort of how has the pack evolved is what we're talking about. The value of the pack, I think, hasn't changed. I think it's great because you're talking about going and connecting with individuals, engaging, and etc. I think the pack's evolved and become something a little bit more digital and a little bit more different.
Yeah, exactly. And bringing to life and not just letting it sort of reside on an intranet or on an email once upon a time. Sort of being able to.
Yeah, it's more interactive, sort of. I guess sort of living, acting, and interactive sort of pack. Yeah.
Cool.
One of the things, Tegan, if that's okay, in that question about mistakes, not mistakes, or other areas is, I think there was two that I was going to raise. Is one, in my experience, we tend to try and do everything too fast. So, I've been there at companies where sort of onboarding induction was 4 days and that was it. It was sort of crammed in, and 9 o'clock you're meeting such, and at 10:30 you're meeting da-da-da, and then 11 o'clock you're meeting such and such, and 12 o'clock you're having lunch with such and such. So that's the social part done. And then the next day, and that's it. By Thursday, you're done. And I think it's sort of extending that. It's really extending that to before you join, whilst you're here, and a little bit after. It needs to be a 3 or 4 month process, a dance, continued sort of engagement and connection, getting to a point where you're fully immersed into the organization. So that would be one point. And the second, I think when we typically have gone to ask people to managers or others who are associated with the process, we tell them how they need to do something. You need to do X. And I think there's a move, and it's really helpful to move a little bit more from the how to the why. I think actually a little video to a manager about the psychology of joining a new company and how that person is going to be feeling, how yourself you have felt when you've joined a new company, is as helpful or as just how you need to do something. Understanding why you need to do it actually gives you the sustainment when you see them in the corridor, when you look at their eyes, where you may not when you're on a call. It actually has a much more sustaining impact in relation to the engagement you'll have and the sort of self-directed action you're likely to take. So I think there's that aspect.
Couldn't agree more. Well, thank you, Tim. I really appreciate your time today. We thank you for sharing, and thank you for everyone for joining today's webinar. We will be posting the recording on our website as well. So if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to get in touch. But have a wonderful day, and thanks again, Tim.
My pleasure. Thank you, everybody, for listening.
Perfect. Have a great day, everyone. Thanks. Bye.